Welcome to Cut the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shamika Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Bull. I am Charles Love alongside my co-hosts Shamika Michelle and Wilfred Riley. And our guest this week is David Marcus. He is a freelance columnist. I guess he writes for everybody. He writes for Fox News, New York Post, Daily Wire, and he's a New Yorker. And that's going to be integral to our conversation today. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you guys for having me.
It is great to have you. You know, Will and Shamika and I talked about what, when we talk about topics and things we want to talk about, we had this idea to bring people on from different cities so they can talk about their cities, what they like and what they don't like about their cities, but also what it was, what it is, and what it should be, you know, since George Floyd and COVID and things of that nature took hold of the country. And one of the first people I thought of was you. You know, when I first started following people, you know, the New York people I follow, this was before COVID, so it wasn't all this kind of stuff with like you and Carol deserted us and moved to Florida, so she doesn't count.
Oh, be nice.
Right. Hey, she beat you to the show. She's been on the pod before. So
all right.
But the interesting thing though is, think back to this. You want to talk about how much things have changed? What I used to notice about the two of you when I followed you, most people know you for writing your articles and things of that nature, but no, it was this insane, very deep love for New York, right? I don't think I had moved here yet, but Carol used to just post pictures of the skyline and just be like, this is why I love this place. And you write like a beat poet, right? You would just have these little short, whimsical comments. It makes you want to be there. And then I moved here, Dave, and you sold me a bill of goods. And so you can tell me all this wonderful stuff, but I need to know all this stuff that I missed in New York, because I didn't see all this stuff you told me about. So talk a bit about the New York of before Charles and pre-Charles, you know, all the wonderful things about New York that people who don't get here don't really see when they, you know, talk about New York.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because I knew that we would be talking about it. And when I think about New York, I think it's Act 17 when Paul goes to Athens, right? St. Paul, he's out there, he's evangelizing, and he has to go to Athens because Athens is, you know, where these great philosophers are. And it's described in the New Testament, and they say, the Athenians and the foreigners who live there do little else all day, but listen to new ideas and talk about them. Right, and that's how Athens is described in the New Testament. That's how I feel about New York, and that's the New York that I've, you know, really been in love with since I was like, I grew up in Philly, and I love Philly too. But you know, I've lived in New York for 20 years, and on and off in the 10 years before that. And you know, what I fell in love with in New York is New York still is, and always I think will be, the place where people from all over the country come to be around, I don't know, the weirdos, the you know, the people for whom the normal life doesn't click in some way. And I think I understand that your experience is different, because I think we're probably operating at about 60% of what we normally are.
And that's now, not the first year. I would say you're operating at less than that.
No, I mean, we were at like 10%. Yeah. And I still think we have a long way to go, but I mean, that's the energy that I love about New York.
Right. Okay. So, and then, so Shamika, I know you got a daughter that's been preening to go to New York for a while. I don't know if it's changed in her, but I know you've been like, well, what's the rush? You know, why go? So what is it, you know, that from the New Yorker standpoint, the outsider looking in, before you kind of change your mind, what do you think, outside of Broadway, because she wants to be an actress, but what was the draw? What is it about New York that you think, like David said, brings people here, that makes people want to come here?
They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. That's the only reason. I mean, really. there are a few people that I know there that I would love to see, but really her being an actress is what it is. I've been there before and I don't like it. The buildings are too tall. I feel like they're closing in on me. I can't breathe. I feel like I need to see a tree and there isn't any in the city that I can remember. So I don't actually like New York at all. It's just too crowded for me. But that's where she wants to come. And I was really excited about it until COVID. And then until I've seen all of the crime happening and nothing is happening to the people. Yeah, it just made me a little fearful for her to come, especially if I can't be there the entire, I think they're supposed to be there like 7 days or something, maybe. I'm not comfortable with that.
Well, we'll get to the crime and all that kind of stuff because Dave posted about that too. But I got something to say about your trees. But Will, what are your thoughts about the greatness of New York?
Just about New York in general.
Yeah, about what's the draw, why people like it, and why
Solid
it's different
place,
from other
heard
places.
of it. I mean, my actual opinion on that. I like New York. I've been to New York briefly on business, so on down the line. I think for me, it's a little different because I mean, I grew up in downtown Chicago. Like I went to St. Mary's on the north side of Chicago, so on. And so there was a little less for people from Chicago, LA, maybe Miami. There's a little less of the awe of that. That's an apex world city. It's sort of seen as a bigger, dirtier version of your own city in competitive terms. I like it. I mean, you guys
actually think that's true?
Yeah, I mean,
Dave is about to get up and walk out.
No, I mean, I just that's amazing.
Of his own house. I'm in my own house.
I think most people from those places do think that's true. Like, I mean, Chicago, it's about the same size as Brooklyn, but it's about 1 million people bigger than Manhattan. And I mean, when I've been to New York, I've seen a large city. The most impressive city I've ever seen is Ciudad de Mexico, actually. I mean, so I think that New Yorkers feel there's this idea that you're going, like the idea you're going to Athens. You want to be the best people in the world or something. In reality, I mean, the people that I've met in Chicago are exactly equivalent. It's the same sort of hipsters or whatever the cultural fashion is at the time. Northwestern and Chicago are exactly on par with the schools in New York. New Yorkers will freak out if you say this and argue with you at length. But I mean, that's pretty much what I
maybe in the next 2 minutes.
No, because this from a man who thinks that whatever that like bowl of bread soup that they have is actually pizza in Chicago.
So see, this is what I mean. Like this can go on for hours. Like the New York cracker with the pepperoni on it.
They said except we're right.
But no, I don't think so. The hot dogs with the ketchup on them and so on. I mean, at any rate, I think in all honesty, though, I think obviously a healthy New York is good for the USA to some extent. Like a New York is one of the symbolic, American places. So you don't want to see New York, when you see the empty streets in Times Square or something, that is extremely bizarre. And again, I will say that also happened in Chicago and LA.
Yeah, no, that was completely strange. I mean, I remember, I think the first time I went back to Manhattan in 2020 was probably late May. So, I mean, I had gone from the middle of March, through April, not going to Manhattan. Right? I mean, it was bizarre, right? And I did, and it was, man. I mean, there was nothing. You just walk down the middle of the street. It was crazy.
Yeah.
It was like that in every big city, though. Not to just running on with like the friendly rivalry stuff. But I mean, I went back to Chicago once, like 2 months into COVID, and there was like a crazy guy sitting in front of an empty Sears Tower playing a flute. Like this dude with the long coat on, like whistling on this fucking panpipe. And you realize like this is real. They're doing this. Like they actually shut down Michigan Avenue. They shut down Times Square. They really did it. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And it was all based on lies, by the way.
The first time I ever went to Chicago was in November of 2020 because I had gone to I had never been to Chicago before. By the way, absolutely stunningly beautiful city. Like all kidding aside, like it really is architecturally just like fantastic to look at, unreal. But yeah, so this was like November of 2020. And like indoor dining was still sort of like dicey. And like, I went to a restaurant and like outdoor dining in November in Chicago, man, that's That's a hard dollar. Like,
right. It should be a discount.
I know, yeah, but you can't punish them.
Right, without a doubt. But we got to take a segue. We're going to go back to that because Dave, I don't know if you all know, but Dave wrote a book recently because you said it was all, built on a lie and done by the government. And his book is about that, right? It's Charade, I believe is the name of it. We talked about it before. But one interesting piece that we spent most of our time talking, which is about, which can tie to the topic here, is how he has a chapter in the book that's called something like, it's been a while, Dave, forgive me, but something like, it's the myths of the COVID situation, Shamika. And what he says is, we're all in this, watch the air quotes, we're all in this together, right? So we talked about how and I was kind of in the middle because I was moving here, but I was coming from Chicago, but I got friends in different places and I traveled for a little while. And in doing the podcast, we had just started the podcast. So I'm talking to Shamika and Will, and we all have completely different experiences. My brother was like, man, yeah, well, this COVID thing is terrible. They closed stuff down for 2 days. I'm like, what do you mean 2 days? Oh, no, we're back to normal. But those 2 days were really hard, right? And then they were back to normal, right? Here, it was like a ghost town. I mean, New York, you say there's no trees, but somehow I saw tumbleweeds going down, 2nd Avenue. It was weird. But then in doing research for the book, Dave, talk about what you said. I remember you went to Vegas, you went to different places, and when you traveled around, you weren't seeing this same picture everywhere, right?
No, I mean, it was dramatically different wherever you went. I think San Francisco was the most extreme example that I had, where it really was like, this was, I guess, mid 2021. So it was like, show your vax card, all this stuff. I think that one of the telling things right in this moment is that when we look back now at the period of late April 2020, when Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida and Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia both said, okay, we're not doing this anymore, right? And the Atlantic magazine accused them of human sacrifice in a headline. No, literally, it said an experiment in human sacrifice, right? Even President Trump said he thought they were going too far.
Yep.
And that if there were problems, he might jump in, right? I don't think there's any way to look back now at the results in those states and the results in states like New York, Michigan, and California, and arrive at any conclusion other than the fact that DeSantis and Kemp were right. I mean, I don't think it's disputable anymore.
But the shocking thing, though, and I know they're going to back up. It seems crazy to talk about this, talking about the CDC, how much trust we have in them, but how what they say must matter. Because I don't know if you all noticed this. Well, you have a kid. But for what the CDC just came out and said, well, what is that? 10 days. You all may know better than me. Whenever they came up with the new guidelines. Before that, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, was considering forcing vaccination on the kids. He was saying, he said 2 months ago,
which he promised not to do on the campaign trail,
right,
by the way.
And he's like, well, I'm just giving you all know, giving you a heads up, come fall, everybody's going to have to be vaccinated. You can't come back to school because this is going to kill everybody. And now yesterday, they announced new guidelines, and it's just the opposite. They're like, well, no restrictions. You don't have to test anymore. But if it wasn't for that, he'd be trying to force. So it's not even like they still got it, right? Even to this day, they're moving by the winds of the political whims, and since their side is still saying, this is the what do they call it, Shamika? The pandemic of the unvaccinated. Yeah. So since they're still saying that, then that's what it is.
I don't understand. I've struggled. I've written a lot of columns trying to figure out what the Democrats are doing nationally, in New York, like anywhere, because I've never seen a political party that is so utterly immune to public sentiment. It's like, it doesn't matter how low Biden's approval rating gets. It doesn't matter how much the American people say this is not what we want.
Right. Policing, anything. We want more police. Well, we're going to get rid of police.
And they just press ahead with it. And I don't, like I'm writing my second book right now, and it's about this, and I don't have it yet. I don't understand it yet.
Right. It's crazy. And then back to New York. I know earlier when we were talking about New York, there was a some little banter about the rivalry between cities. But I'm in the middle, so I understand it, and I can kind of see. I mean, I can see before, but unless you're in it and you're there, you don't really feel that vibe. And I understand it a bit, even though it's 60%, but it's still not there. But I got to tell you, like, I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but when my wife first, like, I got this opportunity, family's there. What do you think about moving to New York? And I said, they don't have alleys. I mean, it took me a month to just deal with trash on the street. I was like, so you just put it right there? It's like, yeah, but my rent's $9,000. So I know the poor people probably put their trash in the front. But if I pay $9,000, where do you put the trash? Oh, the same places. You just step over it. What's the big deal? Yeah, that was kind of crazy. But there's no, I mean, most, even you compared to Chicago, that's where I moved here from. Most big cities aren't really open 24 hours a day, right? Like Chicago has neighborhoods that are open. There's places you can go. You could always get something in Chicago 24 hours a day in the normal non-COVID world in certain places. But New York, it's just New York 24 hours a day, right? It's just a kind of different vibe. And the difference is there's a divide economically, but even though the haves in New York and the have-nots may have a bigger gap than, say, maybe not San Francisco, then maybe Chicago. But they're not as far away as they are in Chicago, right? You got Gold Coast and you got the south and west side of Chicago. But in New York, poor people live in Manhattan, right? People are not, until you move to New York, you don't realize that, but poor people live in Manhattan, right? And I'll let Dave, talk a bit more about New York. But Shamika, to your trees thing, Dave's probably gonna laugh at me because I'm gonna sound like you a little bit. So I was better than Shamika. I know that there's trees or whatever, and there's neighborhoods, even in Manhattan. But the other problem is most non-New Yorkers look at the center of the financial district or the center of Manhattan as all of New York. So you're not counting. If you go to certain neighborhoods like where Dave lives and other places, like he says, he's got a little backyard of port. So that's more than you get in some cities. But beyond that, I went to visit a friend of mine somewhere in an area called Queens. I don't know. I've been here 2 years, but I've been in an apartment. Give me a break. So I went to visit my friend, and he said, we're going to come to my house and we're going to walk to a restaurant. So we're walking. And I felt bad, but I would make fun of myself. So I'm walking and I'm like, is that a house? And he's like looking at me like I'm an alien. He's like, what do you mean? I'm saying, I've never seen a house. That's a house. I don't mean a typical brownstone in Brooklyn. And like I was gonna say Brooklyn, but people think of like Harlem. I was like, no, this was a house. This was a regular bungalow like Chicago sitting there. He's like, yeah, we have these in this neighborhood. And then he said, I really got something for you. He took me around the corner and there was an alley. Now, there wasn't really an alley like the alley we're used to, Will, but it was kind of alley-ish, right? It was a side street that went between two homes with garbage cans in it.
What are you guys doing in these alleys?
Alleys are great because they keep all the stuff we see on the subway.
Oh yeah, you down the stairs. The trash cans in them and so on. Yeah.
I'll go to you real quick, but one of the best lines, there was a shooting in Chicago back when Rahm Emanuel was the mayor. And I know he's just being emotional. He's just speaking from his heart. But it's like he had a press conference. He's saying, this is terrible. Some teenager got shot. This is terrible. We need to stop this. If you're going to do this and you're going to put that gun in the shooter, and you got beef with somebody, you take that to the alley. So, the leading, government official in the city said, if you're going to shoot and open their drugs and do that kind of thing, take that to the alley like respectable criminals would do.
No, we had alleys in Philly. I know. I understand.
Oh, you remember alleys? Okay.
But Philly has alleys, yeah.
No, Shamika?
Yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about when you said alley.
What? Oh, because you're like in the farm. You live.
I mean, like you're saying it like it's something great or popular, and I'm like, what?
It is great.
I wouldn't
if the alternative is to put my trash in front of my house, then yeah, it's a pretty good thing.
But see, so
I have to take my trash in front of my house every Tuesday.
I mean, thinking of the things I actually liked about Chicago, like sports teams, the sort of nightlife neighborhoods, all the colleges in the city, it's the densest concentration in the country or whatever. I don't know if alleys would really be in the top like 5, but we do have Chicago teams, and I do think alleys are a good place to put your garbage. And I do think that's one of those things. I mean, like there is a lot more resident. So there are a couple points there. Like one, people who aren't from cities, and both of you guys, Charles from Chicago, Marcus from New York, I mean, have made that point. When people come to a city, they tend to think of kind of the tourist trap downtown as the city. No, Chicago, I think more than any other big city I've been to is a city of neighborhoods.
Yep.
Where once you get out of the central downtown, I mean, there's a lot of segregation, but there's also a lot of people essentially just living in regular one-family houses.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true in Little Italy, that's true in Bronzeville, Bridgeport, Cloverland, like all of those classic neighborhoods. So yeah, they have alleys, but I don't know if that's the most distinctive thing about them. I do think it's an improvement over like putting the trash in front of the building.
No, look, I think that's a key point, and I live in one of those neighborhoods in New York, right? Because
Correct.
Brooklyn, almost name for name of those neighborhoods you just said in Chicago, they exist here, right? I mean, and yeah, there's a lot of New Yorks. When I was, in my mid 20s to mid 30s, I lived on the Lower East Side, and that's where the clubs were, and that was great. You go to Brooklyn like when you have a kid, and where I live in Brooklyn now, Sunday morning I'm sitting on the front porch, and my neighbor from 2 doors down, Bruno, Italian immigrant who bought the house, I don't know, 45 years ago, comes over with some tomatoes, right? We have a little conversation. Last night I spent 45 minutes sitting on the front porch with George, who lives next door, and I have my Chinese neighbors on the other side. They brought me tomatoes tonight. I mean, that's also New York.
Tomatoes, apparently.
Tomatoes are big.
Tomatoes versus alleys. That's the.
I'm not kidding, man.
That's what it really comes down to.
No, man, people bring you their tomatoes, and it's a big deal, and they kind of want to know whose tomatoes are best. And
I like that.
I handle that the way I handle Republican primaries. I'm just kind of like, it's all delicious. Thank you.
Wait, you mentioned Republican primaries. Will, did you want to say something first? I was just going to ask.
Just a very quick comment. Also, I think most people from outside a city, while we're talking cities and making fun of the different cities, don't understand what a place is at a given point in time. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like in New York, one of the things that was wild to me when I started, just like, again, I live in Kentucky right now, which I love, but like when I socialized with friends from like back at all the different places I've traveled, one of the things that I thought was absolutely hilarious is that Brooklyn, which as a young guy in Chicago, I thought of as kind of a hood immigrant area, is now kind of the hipster / family area of New York, mostly from what I hear. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if most people that aren't from that area or that don't know someone who is would know that. Right. So it is interesting. Like your perception of a place totally changes when you get there and when you actually interact with, the phrase that comes to mind is motherfuckers that live there. People that are from that community.
That's Mike Bloomberg's legacy, right? Rudy Giuliani's legacy is that Rudy Giuliani fixed Manhattan between like 94 and 02, I guess, when he left office, right? Bloomberg's legacy is Brooklyn. Bloomberg, in his 3 terms, I had a sort of love-hate relationship with Bloomberg. But listen, man, he's not, he wasn't a lunatic, right? Like he wasn't one of these lunatic leftists. He wasn't Lori Lightfoot, right?
All right, De Blasio.
No, he wasn't De Blasio, right? I mean, Bloomberg was, and Bloomberg's legacy really was Brooklyn. He had a vision for it, and he pulled it off.
Oh yeah, I mean, everybody. I'd say 90% of the people I've met since I've been here live in Brooklyn. Everybody, I'm like, man, everybody lives in Brooklyn. Yeah. But to that, since we're talking politicians, what did they do to your beloved New York in the last year and a half? How's it changed?
Look, I think
it's got to be astronomical.
It did start with De Blasio, and I think that the controversy and the ending of Stop, Question, and Frisk was a big problem. I think that under Ray Kelly, I think Ray Kelly was a great police commissioner. I think Bloomberg was a good mayor. It got out of hand to some degree. There were too many stops. I got stopped. I used to work as a mover and a journalist at the same time, and like you'd get stopped, right? Mm-hmm. But what Stop, Question, and Frisk did for the city, for the 15 years that it was in effect, was people in gangs or people in, people who had a reason to carry a gun, right? They didn't carry it on them. Mm-hmm. Right? Because even without committing a crime, that could jam you up.
Right.
So the gun stayed someplace else. Now, in a city like New York, where people are going to have beef and like something gets flared up, right? The difference between I have a gun on my hip and I've got to go 3 blocks away to go get my gun is a huge, huge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think that was the beginning of it. Clearly, the bail reform is a disaster.
Right.
Every time one of these horrible incidents, like someone getting pushed into the subway or whatever it is happens, we find out this person's been arrested 16 times.
Right.
I mean, there's got to be a way to fix it. And I'm disappointed in Mayor Adams. I'm not, New York's hard to cover, right? Because listen, it's not 1991. I lived here in 93, right? In 1991, there were 2,000 murders in New York City. I think last year there were like 350. So,
and as an uptick, right? Before it was in the 200s for a while.
Yeah, but I'm saying like this is anyone who knew New York City in the late 80s and early 90s knew a level of fear and danger that we're not even in the neighborhood of.
Right.
Like not close. And that's why it's a hard story to cover. And, and I'd say like, I think if your daughter's coming to do like an acting program, my background was in theater. I went to NYU to study acting long time ago. I don't think you have to worry about crime in that kind of scenario. In that kind of a setting, I think that you can feel 100% confident that she'll be safe. And look, I think Chicago has a great theater scene. It really does. Minneapolis does. But if you want to be an actor, if that's what you want to do, there's a reason Frank Sinatra sang the song, man. It's New York.
You know what you should do? You should send her your deep analysis in the research that you did. The video you shot on the subway where nothing was happening.
Right. No, that was my idea. I was going to start a Twitter account of like average subway trip, because we always see these viral videos of like crazy stuff happening. Like I've been taking the subway for 20 years. I've never seen anything like any of that. And that's where I think conservatives have to be careful with these viral videos, right? Because there's really interesting polling. If you ask Democrats how many unarmed Black men are shot by police in a given year, right? About 50% of them say somewhere between like 1,000 and 10,000. The answer is 27.
Right.
Right. So I mean, there's this sense of like, oh my goodness, this, and it's because of viral videos. They see the George Floyd video, they see these, and they think, well, this must be the tip of the iceberg, right? And I think conservatives need to be careful when they're watching these New York City subway videos, not to fall into that same trap and think that this must be everywhere when in fact it's not.
You're good. You're off mute. Will, were you?
Who, me? Yeah, no, I mean, it looked like everyone kind of paused at the
No, it looked like you were coming off mute. So that's
why. Okay. No, yeah, I'll make a comment. Actually, I agree with that. I think that everyone has a natural tendency to perceive sort of the other man as far more dangerous than they actually are. And this is actually something I professionally researched. So yeah, I mean, that figure that was just cited is correct. I mean, it's the Skeptic Research Center. They polled people that identified not as Marxists or communists or anything, but as standard liberals, and asked them how many unarmed Black men they thought were killed annually by the police. And it was 34% of them thought it was about 1,000. 15% of them thought it was about 10,000. 8% thought it was more than that. I mean, to put this in context, there are only 15 to 20,000 murders a year in the whole country. Blacks make up maybe half of them. So, I mean, it was just a crazy level of confusion, and that's not uncommon. So, I mean, the one other example I'll give is, in really like July of 2020, KEX-TC, the European consultancy, asked a group of, I mean, it would have been mostly upper middle class women when you look at their pools, but what percentage of the population they thought had gotten very sick from COVID or died of COVID? And the average answer was these people thought that 10% of all Americans were dead. because I mean, so many people in that group were home at the time, people were isolating, but they thought this was this world-ending plague. So yeah, I think that's a good point, that the same thing happens on the right. Like, I have conservative friends in Kentucky, and in like urban Kentucky, like in Center City, Louisville, which has like 2 million people, that will say, frankly, I wouldn't go to New York or Chicago because I'd be killed. I wouldn't go there without 2 guns on me. And you get the impression that they envision sort of Black or Italian guys driving down the street, just shooting out of Escalades at random. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, when you see videos of people giving head on subway trains, or like homeless guys fighting, of course that's not going to happen on the Metro in a city at 7 a.m. most of the time. You know, 3 a.m. That's a different
true. I laughed when I saw David's video, because I was like, while that's true, especially when you come to violence, you do see some of the other thing, because there's 2 other pieces to, you know, what's the problem with New York and how to get it back to where it should be. So you talk about the crime, and it's not nearly at those 80s and 90s levels, but I guess people like you and me and others are sounding the alarm, because it's moving in a direction and no one's trying to stop it. So if you keep letting people out, it will get worse. It may never get to 2,000 a year, but everybody in New York wasn't here at that time. So people will start to feel unsafe sooner, and that's a problem. But then talk a bit about the other problem being homelessness and that kind of thing. So you do see, and I'm sure it was a problem before COVID exacerbated it, but you see people sleeping everything. So when I looked at your video, I was laughing. I was like, yeah, you don't see any violence like that. But when I'm on the train, there is some things I see. I won't say every time, but a good percentage, more than 20% of the time, there's somebody peeing on the train or in the station, somebody smoking weed, somebody, you know, playing a radio out loud. So just some kind of just, you know, typical nuisance. Not that you were afraid, but just like, oh, I got to deal with this guy again. Someone's sleeping, you know, all the homeless and that kind of thing. So talk about how that has changed in the last year or so, year or two.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've written about how the permissiveness of certain behaviors, whether it's, you know, and look, obviously you see I smoke cigarettes, but people smoking on the subway, or people doing things they shouldn't do on the subway, right? That permissiveness is a problem, because New Yorkers, people who live in any big city, you have a kind of spidey sense, right? Like, you get if something's going on that like isn't quite right, like you go, oh, all right, something's happened. It's not. When there's a permissive atmosphere, generally, that's always going off, which makes it useless, right? Because it's just all around you. And so, yeah, I mean, that's become a problem. And I mean, clearly the only answer to that problem is, you know, for there to be better policing. You know, but I don't know. This has been a really hard story for me to cover over the past year and a half, maybe the most difficult that I've ever covered, because I've been trying to balance. This was true early in COVID as well, but I've been trying to balance like real concern, as you say, about we're trending in the wrong direction, this is a problem, and we need to be alarmed about it, with like, hey, family from Long Island, don't feel like you can't come to New York. And I know that's not my responsibility, and I know that I don't control any of that, right? But just like as a columnist, as someone, like, I feel like columnists are a weird kind of journalist, because like I think columnists are the only journalists who, our job is to look through the eyes of the people, right? The reporter's job, the sports writer's job, like everybody else's job is to say, I know more about this than you. Here, you know, here's what's happening. The columnist's job is a lot more to, like, as I said, look through the eyes of the people. And that's been a really challenging story to tell in New York over the past couple of years.
Well, Shamika, you're well, not the family in the suburbs, but you're the lady in North Carolina who's questioning whether you come to New York. To the homeless thing, would you say, and I'd love to get you know, Dave's response to this too, but that there's the balance really, I mean, he has to cover it the way he needs to cover it, but the balance may be not even just policing in that sense directly. I mean, the police are going to have to enforce it, but isn't the issue what you do from a standpoint? So the left is always saying that we need to be more compassionate, which I don't necessarily disagree with, right? So I'm not saying these people are criminals and they should be doing 20 years in prison, But I shouldn't have to, like, my son goes to the Y, we walk. And I have to walk and keep that spidey sense, as Dave mentioned, because there's always some random guy who's yelling at you, why are you on my block? You know, right? Or, oh, did you take my shoe? Right. And he's like obviously mentally ill, but he's just yelling. So is he gonna jump at my son? Do I need to, do something or whatever? Like, so that happens far more often than it should. And so I agree with the left that these people need to be shown compassion. We need to help them. We need some government funding to get beds if they want to get off the street, all this kind of stuff. That's fine. But the problem is those same people refuse to do anything to get them off the street. So I say to protect the citizens, to protect that family in the suburbs and Shamika and her daughter so they can come. I say, well, those people can't live on it. Now, at least New York, unlike Chicago and DC, they don't allow tents. Right. So you can sleep on the street all you want in the door front or whatever, but you're not supposed to have tents. Where in DC, you go to Union Station, it's Hooverville, right? So they don't do that, but they don't do anything. They got a part of the force whose job it is to monitor the homeless, but all they doing is talking to them, right? They don't do anything. Do you need anything? So would that be part of the things that would change the perception of the city, as it were? And do you think that they should be able to remove them from the street if they have some, obviously having some place besides jail to put them, but we can't just say, oh, well, they're homeless and just let them roam the streets all hours of the night. Shamika.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out where this compassion is supposed to come in, because but
you don't feel bad for a guy saying, like, give me back my nickel.
No, I want to shoot him. Because I don't appreciate somebody coming up to me or making me feel threatened, or my children. Like, I had a homeless person come up to me a couple weeks ago and asked me for a couple dollars. And I was like, I don't have any cash. I'm sorry. And this Negro had the nerve, dressed as a woman, to be like, oh, bitch, what? Like he was reaching in his purse. And I just looked at him like he was crazy. But I was really wishing, like, dog, why I don't got my gun in my purse? Because I would have pulled it out and then been like, and now what? And I would have shot him if I had to. And I'd have just had to do whatever time, for the crime. But I don't like that kind of stuff. So I don't feel like I should have compassion for those people. I understand you might have smoked the wrong drugs. It caused you to snap. I don't like any of that stuff. Stay where you are. I don't care if it's in a tent, in a hut, underground. You do you over there and leave us regular folk alone. That's how I feel.
Right? Underground. But how do you know? Did you ask his pronouns before you just kept saying his person, his dress?
That's a good point.
Did I ask his pronouns? I ain't have to. I saw his penis print in them little booty shorts that he had on, and I could tell a man when I see one. So no, I don't care. I don't care.
Are you a biologist?
Yes, I am.
Or a Supreme Court justice. Maybe she's a Supreme Court justice.
Right. Well, it's just qualified. I mean, more qualified now, I would say, because she can actually answer that question.
But Dave, what do you think? I mean, don't we have a responsibility to the human nature of our fellow humans to help them if we can, but we also got a responsibility to protect people and not let them smoke crack and have sex. I just saw a segment of news before that an area in your neck of the woods in Brooklyn, people are talking about moving away because they're like, down the block from them, there's all this kind of stuff going on, and the homeless people are on the schoolyard, and the kids go out to play on the playground. They got to watch adults having sex and all this other kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So can't we stop that and not, Will, what am I doing? But can't we stop that and, protect the people who need help?
Well, so we talk about homelessness. Homelessness is 3 specific problems. Right. The one part of homelessness is economic homelessness. That's the woman who's leaving an abusive marriage with her 2 kids and she's living in the car. Right. And she really just needs a bridge loan, right, to get to a more stable situation. Right. That's a part of homelessness that we can actually pretty effectively address, mm-hmm, if we do it well. Right. The second component of homelessness is addiction and people who are addicted to drugs. again, there are approaches that we can take. It's not going to work for everybody, but you can sort of try to tailor things to that. The third is the mentally ill. That's complicated, right? Because to your question, at what point can the state intervene? If I'm walking around in Times Square and some guy's, yelling, racist or anti-Semitic things like in my face or whatever, is that a point at which there can be an intervention? Does he have to put his hands on me? Those are hard questions. I will say, in September of 2021, I went to the Tenderloin in San Francisco. And I remember my hotel was almost right there, right? And I walked around, and it was literally just both sides of the street lined with tents, people shooting up, right? Not a cop, not only not a cop, like no sign of any civic intervention at all, like not a garbage man, like nothing. Like these people are just left in this world,
right,
to exist in this horrible way. And I remember getting back to my hotel room because I had to file as I was writing for Fox. And, I wrote the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and I read them and I was like, it's not strong enough. And I did another couple and I was like, this still isn't. It took me like 4 times to be able to actually explain what I was seeing in an American city. It was unbelievable.
It's like a no-go zone in Paris.
You can't explain it. I didn't have words for it.
Wow. Anybody else? Will, you want to get in there and say something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually think that the question, I think I actually read the essay that David's talking about, but I think the question is often misphrased on this issue. And Charles, I know you're doing the thing of give the opponent their point, sort of. But this is often phrased as, should we be compassionate to the mentally ill or something like that, or should we protect the citizenry? But that's exactly wrong. Like, you're not being compassionate by letting people live under bridges in refrigerator boxes or quote unquote sex work as low-paid street hoes with pimps. I mean, if you're deep in the throes of drug addiction, or if you are mentally ill and what's going to cure you is going into the clinic and being force-fed your pills for the first 5 days, just letting you live outside is not a moral thing. Now, first of all, I'll also add, I don't really care. Like, I've been a boss fairly often, as I think all of you had. I'm not an especially moral person, and I think there has to be order. So you can't have people like shitting on the street and scaring the kids in the first place. Like, I would brutally throw them in jail no matter what the moral standard was. But in fact, it's always better to be good when you can, walk in the light when it's possible. And in this case, the two things go absolutely together. Like, if someone is an abused prostitute who's addicted to heroin, you need to start that process where you take them and put them to a place where they can't buy smack. And you talk to them about what's really going on. And you also, by doing that, remove them from a place where they can threaten or rob or hurt a citizen. Like, I remember actually the clearest experience I've had of this was after all the giant cities we've talked about, Minneapolis, kind of a mid-sized one just recently. But like, my hotel was in downtown Minneapolis. I was there to give a speech at some like engineering conference, and the entire area was full of crazy homeless people, like legit textbook schizophrenics, like guys walking around screaming at me briefly and at each other and at people that weren't there, like yelling out things that seemed really explicitly to refer to stuff they'd seen in Iraq or as abused children. And you have to do something with that guy. There's a lot to be said for mental institutions. So that's it. That's my take.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Now that he said mental institution, like, maybe you all can answer this question. Was there like some type of government push to like close these? Because here they were closed. And so it's like, now the people that may have gone to mental institutions are roaming the streets or are homeless. They don't have any place to be. Whereas before they had mental institutions, but we had 2 here for sure that closed down.
I actually know Charles and David are both experts on this too, but like, I'm a windy guy, so I'll say like one thing. Yeah, like one of the few things the Republicans and Democrats ever did together was shutter the state-owned mental institutions. That shit started with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It was like people started investigating these institutions like orphanages, mental institutions, so on, that were caring for the damaged in society. And they found a lot of flaws. They found some sexual abuse. So the idea was, let's just close them. Like the liberals thought that people could just live on their own. Their families would take care of them. And the conservatives were like, what the hell? That's 8% of the budget. And they just shuttered them. And that's when you started seeing just openly crazy people in the streets, like the 80s.
No, that's right. And you know, I think you make really the key point about what is the compassionate choice. And I think it also applies to bail reform, because I understand the idea that, you know, there's the 21-year-old kid who makes a stupid mistake and there's no reason that that kid should be at Rikers or whatever it is. Okay, right? And if you can tailor a law to handle that situation, you know, I'll have a look at it. What we have with bail reform in New York is a situation where kids are just becoming recidivists, right? And that's not helping them, because first you're going to arrest them for, like, you know, some little petty crime. Then you're going to arrest them for burglary. Then it's going to be armed robbery, and you're going to keep letting them out. Eventually they're going to kill somebody. That person's going to be dead. And that 22-year-old is going to be in jail for the next 40 years of their life. That's not showing them any kindness.
Unless they kill someone in Manhattan and it's not a high profile murder.
Right.
Then they'll be in jail for like 6 years.
Or unless it's self-defense. No, but you take my point. I mean, I don't think that these progressive ideas of like forgiving everyone's crimes help the criminal. I really don't think they do.
Oh, it definitely does. And they don't even do it with crime. I was going to make a quip about what Will said. He made some great points. He's our resident intellectual to make Shamika and I seem smart. But he says something about, sex workers is not being, allowing people, sex work is okay. It's not compassionate. And if somebody's a prostitute and they're addicted to drugs, you got to get them off the drugs. I was like, but is it Seattle, Portland? Help me out. Is Portland saying that all drugs, not just marijuana, but everything smack, yes, everything should be legal? And then when I moved to New York, before I was sequestered to my apartment, there were billboards on the trains promoting sex work. It was like advertisements. Like, when you take the picture of the stand, you put in an application. What do you mean? Well, it's all great, so.
Well, I mean, so first of all, I think this is an interesting question because, as a teacher and as a coach, one of the things I've found that's kind of unexpected is that the more damaged someone is, the more they need discipline. So I don't really see, I don't see anything wrong with using drugs. I'm not going to talk about whether I commit, federal crimes, but the number of parties you go to with well-adjusted stockbrokers and reporters
are prime ministers.
But yeah, or actually ministers get down in my experience.
So I said prime ministers.
You said black ministers?
Prime minister.
Oh, prime minister. Oh yeah, the prime minister of Finland.
Black ministers
too. Dancing in her cat suit. Putin. If I were Putin, I'd just invade. Enough of this. They're on the border. They might have.
Somebody needs to clean this up.
But anyway, they're in NATO now, so it can't happen. We got the cat girl, heavily armed world leader. But no, I mean, just there's nothing really wrong with using drugs in a moral sense. I don't think the light shines away from that or anything, but you need some kind of order. If drugs are legal, then you need to have a really tough vagrancy law. I guess my cutoff is you can't have that around kids and small dogs. You can't have people outside just doing blow off mirrors sitting on the street. That was just kind of a throwaway line. You can't have it around innocents.
Oh, okay.
The parking lot, when you talk about sex work, for example, there's a difference between sort of sex work, your female friend posts booty pics on OnlyFans and makes $82,000 a year, and street prostitution, where you need a place to hook up and it's going to be the street. There's no way that can be legal.
Is there really a difference between those two things?
There's a difference in that you have a house. Morally, I don't think so, actually. I think the whole sex work thing is kind of problematic. Right. In terms of your point, when there were ads on the train encouraging college girls to do OnlyFans, someone in the city made that decision that advertiser could run those. I wouldn't have allowed it. But I mean, there is a practical, whatever the moral stuff, there's a practical point where you can say, if you're giving head in a schoolyard, which is very common in Chicago and Detroit.
At lunch hour.
Yeah. But if you go outside and you're a teacher and you see hookers just hanging out in the schoolyard, there are ways to deal with that. Trespassing, vagrancy laws.
Chicago sounds amazing. You
I was thinking, what if you're in a relationship?
There's people getting head in the
schoolyard.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's only cool if you go to that school. Like, I mean, if you're in like high school or something, like if you're a 4-year-old kid and you're asking your teacher, like, hey, what's that? There are a lot of negative externalities, man.
Probably so. And then the third thing, of course, is COVID. So, because we got to get to, before you go, how you see it coming back and turning around from it. So you talk about, earlier you said we're about 60%. When I was moving here, I'm picking a neighborhood, what's going to be closed, look at the school, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, man, you know, I don't have alleys. You three leave me alone. But it's the, you know, I'm a foodie and it's the best food store city in the country. I'm going to eat and I'm going to drink and I'm going to be merry, and everything was shut down. And so things opened back up. And Dave mentioned being in Chicago in November, eating outside. It seems weird. When my wife's birthday is in December and we sat on an outdoor patio in December in New York, that wasn't fun. But beyond that, as things come back, everything's open or whatever, I'm like, it's so sad to see little things, it's little cracks, right? So the New Yorkers may notice that other people come and say, oh, it's still kind of cool, it's getting back. But I noticed that there's a place for it, right? So there's a bagel shop, you know, where they turn on the light when they got hot bagels or whatever. And it says 24 hours a day and they close at 6. I think there's one restaurant in my neighborhood now of the 10 that were 24 hours a day when I moved here that is now still 24 hours a day. So you still don't have everything back. Some things are back, right? But, you know, it's going to take a while for that to come back. But I think because some people, I know you got some people who are skeptics, some people who are blind followers, but there are honest people in the middle who are like, I feel I'm too busy to do it. I should be able to look to my leaders and follow them. And they're not erratic. They're not like what I call the mandate morons, but they feel they can trust their leaders, and they should, especially regardless of partisanship, when it's something serious, they should be telling the truth. So they believe them. So when they scream that the sky is falling, I don't know when they're going to stop. I don't know when these people are going. Now, granted, you wrote a piece, and I talked about this, like, you know, you wrote I was talking about it, and you eloquently put it about, yeah, you can say whatever these rules are. Most people just start ignoring them and get back to life. So that we still have mandates to wear masks on public transportation, in Ubers and on buses. But when you're in there, nobody's wearing a mask, really. It's like, well, it's probably up to about 12 to 15. Sometimes if it's the middle of the day, it might be 30%. But most people, the majority, aren't wearing masks on the subway. And police aren't now. So now I'm looking at the workers. So the workers, the people driving the trains, the people in the booth, they used to all wear masks because you had to. But the cleanup people, nobody's wearing a mask anymore, right?
Except the mask. For me, the mask now is like, do you ever the thing where like you put on a suit jacket you haven't worn in a long time, and like you reach in the pocket and like you find like a ticket from some concert, oh, I went to that concert. That's what the mask is. Like I put a jacket on, and like I reach, what's in my oh, there's a mask. That's weird. Right? Like I haven't thought about putting on a mask in New York City. And well, 2 months ago, I witnessed my friend's wedding at Borough Hall in Brooklyn, and I had to and they had one for me that I had to enter a government building. That's the only time, you know. But listen, to your point about can we trust public health officials, and we see this shakeup in the CDC. Look, there was one basic problem from the very, very beginning, which was that instead of just telling us what they knew, what the data were, what the reality was, they told us the things that they thought would make us behave the right way. This began in March of 2020 with the infection fatality rate. Remember the World Health Organization said, oh, well, we think it might be 3 or 4%. That's catastrophic. Right? First week of March, first or second week, Donald Trump goes on Hannity. And he says to Hannity says, well, he thinks 3-4%. Trump says, I've been talking to some people. I think it's much lower. I think it's under 1%. He said, I have a hunch. I wrote a piece in the Federalist the next day criticizing Trump, saying, listen, man, this is a public health crisis. You can't say I have a hunch. Right? But Trump was right. And he explained why. He went on to say, there are so many people who have this and they don't even know that they have it, and we're not testing them. So how do you arrive at infection fatality rate? You take the number of people you know who have it and divide it by the number of people who died.
Right.
So if there's a whole cohort of people who you don't know have it,
right,
and that was the beginning of it, right?
Right.
And they held on to that lie for a while. remember in May in May to June of 2021, we had been told, if you get the vaccine, you won't get it. And then they backed off that a little. They said, listen, well, yeah, there's every once in a while, there's a breakthrough case, but
breakthrough.
You're really, it's very rare. Then it became unusual, right? And then it was like 3 players on the Yankees who were vaccinated all tested positive. And you started to say, wait a minute, that's weird, right? Then remember the Texas Democrats who like flew out of Texas, so
right? 50 in everybody,
and like 10 of them,
right,
who are vaccinated suddenly have COVID, and you're like, whoa. Then there's a case in the White House, and my favorite Jen Psaki moment of all time, she's asked, you know, well, how many cases do you have in the White House? And she said, well, why do you need that information? And right that moment, I knew, like, wow, you guys are lying about this. You guys know you're lying about it, and you really ought to just fess up and say that you're still going to get COVID even if you're vaccinated. But they wouldn't do it.
Well, I got a couple favorites too. I liked, especially, this is a good one because you look at people now, I mean, the percentages are lower, but you still have a decent number of people still wearing masks. I like the don't wear a mask, right? But it wasn't because masks were bad, it's because they didn't have enough. So they were like, don't wear a mask. You don't need to wear a mask. And then they mandated it. So why you mandate it? When you thought that it was 3 to 4% of the world was going to die, you told me not to wear one.
No, I told you why, Charles, because it had nothing to do with, it only had to do with control, right? It only had, because every time that we found out that there was a lie about this, it was always in one direction, right? It was always in the direction of, this is really bad. It was, they never, you know, screwed up and said like, oh, maybe this isn't as bad as we thought it was. That never happened.
Right.
So that was it, man. It was like, all of the messaging was meant to control you, to make you not be able to go to church, to make you stay at home, to make you fearful, right? That was their, Birx wrote it in her book.
Right.
She says it in her book.
Right.
She says, like, we knew that you know, this about the vaccine, but like, you know, we thought it would cause hesitancy. So we,
Wow. So where does it go? I mean, I think people still, I still see, not the majority, but you know, a good 30 to 40% of people that are still like, whatever they say, let's do, whatever they say, do. Oh, when they released the new rules around schools in New York, I was watching the local news and they were interviewing parents. And they were like, oh, this is a bad decision. This is the bad, all the kids gonna die.
Look, this ought to be a much bigger election issue than it has been so far. And I've been trying to write about it as much as I can. I mean, look at these governor's races that you have. I think Tudor Dixon in Michigan is actually doing a really good job of highlighting Gretchen Whitmer's ridiculous COVID policies, right? I'd like to see Lee Zeldin doing that more here in New York, right? Yeah. And it's more difficult because it's not Cuomo, it's Hochul, right? But Hochul was right there with Cuomo.
Right.
And I would like to see Lee Zeldin hammering Hochul more on what happened to our city and what happened to our state because of their COVID policies. I don't feel like I've seen enough of that.
Do you think the only thing that gets us back to where we should be is a change in government, so they're not fear mongering? As what I'm saying is, as long as they're telling you should be scared, we're never going to have, you know, people hugging or shaking hands or taking off masks, or, you know, in the museums now. So I can go, I went to the theater for the first time because I was like, that's another thing. I can go to Broadway, and they were like, mask and vaccination, so I wouldn't do it. And starting July, you can go. So I went to theater. You still can't go to a museum. So I can't take my son to some of the world-class museums because, I had a friend went and they said they put on the mask and said water. And somebody said, this is a federal building. We don't care what the local laws are. You need to have that mask on. I'm sipping water, then goes in the bathroom, she told her.
No, look, it's craziness. I do think you can be optimistic that these restrictions are going to be rolled back. And I don't want to sound too cynical, but I think it's because the Democrats really realize they have to, right? I mean, Joe Biden's central campaign promise was, I'm going to crush COVID.
Maybe by crushing, he meant he was going to test positive 5 times in a row.
Yeah, well, you know, yes. I mean, obviously, the CDC shakeup all by itself shows that he utterly failed in that job, right? But for the Democrats now, it is no longer politically valuable for them to push COVID restrictions. It hurts them. And so I think you'll see them, I think you'll see them continue to be rolled back. But I think we need to be very careful because, you know, anything can be a public health emergency now, right?
Right.
Anything, if we've set this precedent where governors can just say it's an emergency, so I'm suspending all of your constitutional rights for however long I feel like I need to. That's a precedent we've set now. We never had that before in the United States, and it's pretty scary.
So let's you know, finish by I gotta ask you about this. Talking a little comedy. You had a Twitter post. I gotta say, I said it. You tweeted something about Bill Cosby being funny, one of the funniest, and I think I was the first response. I said, Dave, good knowing you. One, because I knew what the reaction would be, but also because I sit out a lot of these stuff. I mean, if you knew the things I deleted, right? Because it's just like sports. All these GOAT lists, they just put whoever the hottest name is now, whoever so I saw somebody posting they're the greatest comedians were. I'm looking at that. I wouldn't put any of these people on this. I mean, I know who they are, but I'm like, they're all right, but greatest ever. So I knew you were also gonna get in trouble by that. But I'm like, ooh, Cosby. So you kind of like Bill Cosby. You said you were from Philly before, and the reaction was swift, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I leaned into it more than that. Listen, I think that I think you have to be maybe 40, maybe even like 45 to really understand what Bill Cosby's contribution to the United States was. I mean, when you think about the fact that like in 1955, right, there was legal segregation in the United States, right? Now, fast forward only to 1972. And he creates this, you know, Saturday morning cartoon show about a bunch of black kids in North Philly that runs for 8 years. You know, fast forward a couple years beyond that, and he crafts a sitcom that literally makes a black family the prototypical. I was like 12 years old when the Cosby Show was on. That was the prototypical American family. You know, the advancements that he helped along were absolutely extraordinary and incredibly important. And the way that he did it was so antithetical to today's left, right? Because his entire message was one of achievement. His entire message was, you know, especially I think to young black men, like go to school, you know, go get a degree or go become a plumber, whatever it is. Like, it's up to you. You can do this and you can achieve these things. And, you know, however terrible his crimes may have been, I don't think that you can fully understand the history of the 20th century of the United States without dealing with Cosby as a really important figure.
Right. And everybody talks about TV shows and movies and getting into acting. You forget about I Spy and when that was. And his comic albums were funny. They were genius. And he was clean. I mean,
he was the best.
Obviously, because he's putting all the weight of the dirt on what he was doing behind the scenes. I'm not saying that, but on his records, he was funny, and you could play it with your kids around. It was no big deal. You didn't have to sneak like Red Fox.
No, I asked Norm Macdonald straight up on Twitter one day to settle like a disagreement, because I think Cosby's the greatest stand-up comedian of all time. I think Newhart is probably number 2, right? I think they sort of float around in my mind as the guys. And I asked Norm Macdonald, and Norm Macdonald said there's a really strong case to be made for Cosby, that the conventional wisdom is Pryor, but that Macdonald thought that Pryor drew so much influence from Cosby that almost disqualifies him.
Right.
So look, I think Bill Cosby's the only American comic genius who can be spoken of in the same breath with Mark Twain. I think it's a category of 2. And I won't let go. I won't accept that we can't have that cultural force anymore because of what he did in his personal life. I just don't, you know, how many people do we lose throughout history if we do that? I think we lose almost everybody.
That's true. Shamika and Will, comments on Bill Cosby and Dave's former Twitter career?
Yeah, I saw that tweet and I immediately was like, I like him already, because I did not like what happened to Cosby. Of course, I don't want to get into the details of the case, but
set me up. No.
I'm still trying to figure out how a man without a gun can make you suck his dick. I just don't know how that happens, but there are women that claim that it does. And so I never felt like I wanted to get rid of everything that he did. In fact, it is, I've told my kids, I want you to start from the beginning of the Cosby Show and watch this. A lot of them, or not a lot, I only have 3, but 2 of them kind of jumped to a different world. And my oldest loves A Different World, but I'm like, no, you have to go to the Cosby Show and just watch that, because it was such a great show. Everything that he did, I loved Fat Albert. And I just think it's really important that we don't snatch that away from history simply because he had a terrible personal life. We don't know what any of these people are doing behind closed doors. Y'all don't know what I'm doing, but you like to hear what I have to say. Sometimes you may think I'm funny, but behind the scenes, I could be a very horrible, terrible person, real nasty.
I don't
only in the bedroom. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, do you want to confess something, Shamika? Because you keep saying maybe, and sometimes I might,
But no, seriously, I love that because it just makes me mad. And the same thing with R. Kelly. Like, regardless of what he did in his personal life, you cannot take away the fact that that man was a musical genius, and he had some of the best songs in the 90s that through the 2000s, and you can't dispute that, period.
Well, let's work.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think there's a general lesson to take from it. Like, I mean, when I look at most of the people I like, I mean, my favorite poets, Rudyard Kipling. I mean, some of my favorite musicians are still Pac and Kurt Cobain from back in the 90s. My favorite athlete, Mike Jordan, of course.
So you only like dead people. Oh, Michael Jordan. I'm about to say, everybody you like is...
Well, I mean, it's not an insult to say Rudyard Kipling's dead. I mean, he lived hundreds of years ago.
I mean, you're going to keep going.
But no, I mean, I think that all of those people apparently in their personal lives had, in fact, not apparently, had extraordinary flaws. I mean, one was killed by gunfire. Two of them were actually. One was a suicide. Kipling was a racist. Mahatma Gandhi was a racist as well, by the way. He hated blacks and quote unquote Britishers. He didn't like anybody. So, I mean, I think to look at Gandhi or Kipling or Pac or Cosby and say, well, this fact in their personal life invalidated their work is a pointless and irrelevant comment. And if you did that, you'd lose most of the work throughout history. So I guess my piece of advice would be, don't admire men or women to some extent. Admire the work they do. Admire what they've given to the world. That's why we build statues. We don't build statues to Martin Luther King, who was a famous philanderer, by the way, very abusive to women, although a great guy otherwise. We don't build statues to him because he was nice to the women in his life. We build statues to him because he worked with Kennedy and Johnson to pass the Civil Rights Act. So that's the work that was done.
We don't build statues anymore. We tear them down.
Yeah. Well, MLK survived so far.
George Floyd.
Wait until they find out what he thought about gay people.
Oh, we did build a George Floyd statue.
George Floyd will get a statue. Several of them, probably.
He's gotten 3 gold statues already.
I'm not over the Teddy Roosevelt statue. I organized a fairly big protest back in 2020 out in front of the Museum of Natural History about that statue, and it's gone. And it's one of those things where it's like, it's look, there's a million things in New York to like see, but like that was one of them. Like that was one of the things where like, you saw it and it's gone and we don't have it anymore. And it's ridiculous.
Well, I guess one day the 4 of us can get together a group of people to protest outside the George Floyd vocational school. Or
Charles, by the way, have you been to Cafe Reggio yet?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to say, so here, just to end the sort of New York thing.
I wanted you to end in New York. Let's go there.
Here's the thing that happens to me fairly often, right? Young conservative journalists will come to New York. They got a job at Fox or National Review or a think tank or something. And they'll DM me and they'll say like, Dave, like, could we have like, coffee or lunch or something? They tell me about New York or whatever. And I love this. I always say yes. The guy or the girl, whatever, they'd say, all right, I always bring them to the same place. I bring them to Cafe Reggio on McDougal Street, little coffee place, opened, I believe, in 1927. First espresso machine in the United States. And it looks like it looked in 1927. And it's one of these places, you know, when I was 18, I was at NYU, and it's where I'd go. It's where I was when I heard that Rudy Giuliani had become mayor. And I didn't have a phone, obviously, right? I was just sitting there reading my book, and the owner came in, who's still the owner. And he said, "Hey, Rudy won," you know, like, and it's such a special and meaningful place. And the reason that I bring them there is because it's authentic, right? And I think that Americans really struggle these days for authentic experiences. We don't have the lodge. Most people don't go to church. They don't have the bowling league. Everything's online. Everything's virtual. And I think New York is still a place where you can have an authentic experience. Not that you can't other places, but, you know, I think that's what, you know, makes it special. And I don't think that's going to change.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I'll have to DM you so I get invited.
And we're going to Cafe Reggio.
And hopefully Shamika will watch this back, play it back, and get some nuggets of why she should let her daughter come to New York. And then, you know, wait a minute, we forgot about the biggest reason. I'm here.
Also, we have the mafia here in South Brooklyn. So if protection is what's needed, I can handle that. That's fine.
Well, thank you.
You got a guy.
Yes.
I like that.
Have a conversation. Everything will be fine.
He is David Marcus. He's a columnist for Fox News, New York Post, and others. You got to check out his stuff. He writes in a way that few people still write, and I think you'll enjoy it. Hopefully, he'll still be around on Twitter after his Bill Cosby post. And Dave, thanks a lot. It's been great having you.
Thanks for having me, man.
I got a country to say, 'cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving a day.